Good evening. My name is Eileen Koenig, and I'm a member of the Pacifica Historical Society and the host of this week's show, Footprints of Pacifica. Each week, the Pacifica Historical Society produces a series, Footprints of Pacifica, in which we archive the history of Pacifica and study the lore of beautiful Pacifica, its character and characters. This week, our subject is Bob Siebert, who was lived a long time in Pacifica. He was a public school teacher, and he used to come to Pacifica in the early days of the Ocean Shore Railroad on family outings. We have a film that we're going to show you of an interview of Mr. Siebert, which was done by Steve Brown, who is our videographer. So we'll show that to start off with.
We moved as a family to Pacifica in 1941, November 1941. And we always remember that's 2 months before, or 1 month before Pearl Harbor. And since then we have kept our home in Pacifica. Then it was Sharp Park. Our acquaintance with the coast side really begins when, as a child, my parents, living at 32nd Avenue in San Francisco, would frequently take visits down to the coast side for picnics and such, and at that time it was horse and buggy, and the automobile began to come into play, and I always remember one thing about the coast side. Even if we came on a foggy day, about the time we gathered everything up and made ready to go home, the sun would come out. And so through the years, as we visited the coast side and became more acquainted with it, when the time came for my wife and me to establish our own home, we were already acquainted with all of the features of the coast side that made it a desirable place for us to live. At the time we moved down here, there were 600 people in the entire coast side, ranging from Edgemar all the way down to and including San Pedro Valley. But as a child, my first acquaintance with the Ocean Shore Railroad as a means of access to the coast came when, as a member of the St. Mary's Choir, my brother and I took part in an excursion, and we went into town. At that time, it was quite an excursion to get from 32nd Avenue into 12th and Harrison, and where the train depot was located. And that was a 40-minute ride in itself. But once on the train, why, it was an experience to go down the coast and to see the land disappear on the seaward side, and the cliffs keep us company all the way down, until we came to a place where something happened and the land fell away on both sides, and we were suspended in midair and traveling across what I later found out was a trestle. And then we would reach the other side of the trestle and again come back onto the cliffside and the ocean view, and on the way down to our first stop would be at the Thornton Station, or subsequent stations along the way, picking up passengers and produce, and the memorable occasion that I'm referring to was when we stopped at that lagoon. The Laguna Salada was named after a lagoon, an arm of the sea that came in and covered a good part of what is now the golf course. And along with the development of the coast side, the realtors and the developers together combined to lay out the plans, as you can tell from certain sections in the city that still have ancient sidewalks, long buried by bushes and trees. And one of the developments on the hill where the Sharp Park Library is located was designed to be a rather scenic spot. But down to the lagoon, they placed a bathing pavilion. Decks reached out into the water, and bathhouses covered the whole area, And many people took advantage of it, and among them were the boys from San Francisco. And I especially remember the occasion because I was pretty young at the time. And when the water got too cold for me, I came out and waited for the rest. I didn't have sense enough to find the attendant and ask him to open the bathhouse for me so I could change into dry clothes, so I shivered for a good half hour. It seemed longer than that before someone came along and told me that I should ask the attendant and preserve myself from freezing to death. In later years, when the Sharp Park Golf Course was being developed, the sand was dredged up from the ocean and pushed into place to form a dike or a barricade between the land and the sea and allow the water in the present lake to become fresh. It drains from the hills. And the doors from the bathing pavilion were saved and brought over to the Fahey Ranch. Now, the Faheys, at the time we met Mrs. Fahey, owned about 80 acres, or controlled about 80 acres, and Mrs. Fahey's home was situated where the Mobile Home Park is now, and adjoining her home was a chicken ranch, and the owner of the chicken ranch, who had leased the land from Mrs. Fahey, used the doors to construct his sheds and chicken houses and so forth. And it was noteworthy for the fact that from the road you could see a sign, "Today's eggs." And then on the reverse side, "No eggs today." So many people going down the coast for a picnic and so forth spotted that as a place to stop off and get fresh eggs. We had, in the castle, we had a Coast Guard detachment stationed up there, and one interesting thing happened to our community. Not only here, but in other parts of the country, a tremendous influx of military personnel to a place that depended upon wells for their water supply made it possible for immediately the wells to be almost drawn dry. And it was one of those things that brought our attention to the fact that we were going to have to do something about getting a water supply that was not dependent on groundwater. On the Fahey Ranch, there was a 200-foot deep well, and think how close that is to the ocean, and it was fresh water. And she used that to irrigate all her fields and to the people who rented the land from her for crops and things like that. And it was an unfailing source of water. But that went down 200 feet, and it was the hardest water that I have ever run across. You couldn't really get any kind of lather with it.
Well, we're pleased and delighted to have as our guests this evening Andrea and Freddie, who are the daughters of Bob Siebert. And we're just nice to have you with us. And we want to welcome you and thank you for appearing and sharing with the memories of your father and growing up in Sharp Park. Also, Mona, his other daughter, is off the camera, but she's also here giving support. Well, we wanted they have some photographs that they brought and some memorabilia, so we'll start off, if we could, with a couple of photographs. And this is some pictures of the well, why don't you?
Those were before our time. Yes, but that was my parents playing badminton in San Francisco, and that was their first car. They lived in San Francisco before they moved down.
And this was
we weren't there, but that was
so it's about 1937, about the year they were married, correct?
Yes,
they were married in
so.
1937. Okay. Then we also have a couple other photos of him as a younger man. This was taken in November of 1939, the larger one. And can you have a story about this photograph?
Well, we had the head of that fish mounted in his den in our little house on County Road for many years, but that brought to mind for me was the great whirling birds that used to cover the ocean, because we had so many bass, and the bass would drive the herring up, and the birds would feast on the herring and sardines. And he used to take us down to see it. We'd say, "What's that big black mass on the ocean?" And he was very fond of the ocean and taught us a lot about the sea.
Oh, that's a nice story. We also have some, now he was a public school teacher in Sharp Park, and I guess he started in where the City Hall is now at San Pedro School, and then they taught some classes when they outgrow their place there in the Little Brown Church.
Right.
He also taught at Odstad School, which was in Lindemar, before it was actually Lindemar. Taught at Lindemar School, and then in Manor is where
So the first school was San Pedro School, and they needed the extension because so many people moved out for the vet bill to buy houses here, because they found out there wasn't any snow out here, and so their children needed to be accommodated, and there were so many kids. He had a 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade at one point, and they put them all in an annex of what's the Little Brown Church. And so then he went to Sharp Park School, was the first built. That's where Ingrid B. Lacey is today. And then the next school would have been Pacific Manor, I think, or was it Lindemar? Odstad?
You're looking at me?
Yeah.
I only remember bringing them lunches at Sharp Park School.
At Sharp Park School. That's the one we
2
remember.
blocks away.
Most. Mhm.
And Odstad, where, did you come and help him? There were not enough, there were too many kids, and so they took that block on Crespi of houses, and so all the teachers, and we went down and we put together the desks and got things ready for the first day of school, and those, so that's what I know about Odstad. Order of where he taught?
A long time at Sharp Park
I don't
School,
know.
and then
Yeah.
I believe...
Pacific Manor was his last one,
Oh,
right?
okay, then it must have been Odstad next.
But he started teaching approximately 1945 until he retired.
That'd be right.
Yeah, so he taught 38 years, I think was what they were saying. And then also there's, could you tell us some of the other organizations your father belonged to? And
Well, first of all, he studied social institutions in school. So he was very interested in how the world worked in terms of what was needed, and what was needed was the Sharp Park Improvement Club. The water crisis and all that that he alluded to in the video brought people together around the issue of water and how they were going to share it out, and whether the county was going to foot the bill or who was going to pay. So after that, as more people moved in, he was part of the sanitary board, and that was more organized. It wasn't just a club, it was a incorporated article, and we'll then deal with the county to get us set up with water from Hetch Hetchy.
great.
But we were kind of young, so I'm shaky on my dates and times and
Oh,
all
that's
that
fine.
there.
Yeah.
At some point, I know the Quonset hut that's in our valley, they would give dances, right? There were
Yeah.
dances, but he also, it was before we were born, he was a Boy Scout leader, and they met at that Quonset hut.
And
so he did that.
He continued Scouts, and he used to call at those dances. He was a square
that's right.
dance caller, and he loved those dances. But what I remember was the dances for the children, that once he had taught the 8th graders, and so he was called in to chaperone dances when they got older, and because he could relate to them.
That's great.
And what else? So beyond that, well, the last job he held was the city treasurer,
Right.
but before that,
I'm hazy on. I was always volunteering and helping, but I'm not sure what the organizations. I know the sanitary board one, because they had meetings at the house a lot to try and pull that together.
Yeah.
So we were aware of the people, but we were kind of young.
Here's one photograph of his
First 8th grade class.
first 8th grade class. So I thought this is a great picture.
It is a nice picture. There were, these kids would come by after school and sit around and visit with my mom. And he was very excited. He wanted to teach and never had thought about teaching. I guess he thought about it, but he never actually embarked on it until my mom went up to Janowitz's store, and Al Janowitz told her that we needed teachers. And so she came home and reported that, and he said, I always wanted to teach. And she said, well, why don't you? He was working for Matson Navigation as a master painter at the time, and he did staterooms to the sides of ships. So they sold some property they had in Montara, and he went back to school and got his credential through State Teachers College, it was at the time, and his master's at Stanford. So that was a huge change in his life and ours.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, I have another photo here. This is when he retired. It's a photograph of when he retired. And do you recognize anyone?
That's Mrs. Drury.
She was scary.
Mary Jane Drury was a tough proposition as a principal went, and they did have a little get-together for his retirement. I'm not sure who's retiring there, maybe both of them.
Yeah, I'm wondering.
A bunch of them. Ann Probst were retired at the same time.
Same time.
It's,
Okay, and we also had a photograph here, and this was spring of 1960 at the Laguna Salada School District, and Laverne Richardson is also in this picture, and of course your dad and all of Laguna Salada. So this is a nice picture as well. You guys did bring some nice photographs. And there's some, here's some photos of, this is from
there he
the
is again.
schools,
I
yeah.
recognize that man.
Oh, and we also, I wanted to be sure to show, did you get this photograph here? And this was the San Pedro School, which is now City Hall. So this would have been the first place he taught, right?
That's true.
Okay. And do you have, okay, also, did you want to discuss this?
This thing sitting here? Well, we were very little, while I think our silences represent areas where we weren't paying attention. The grown-ups were doing all this. What we were doing was being allowed to run down the beach every day from the time, well, my mom took me to the beach when I was tiny, but she'd let us run to the beach or say, go to the store and I need it right away, don't go to the beach. Or you can go to the beach. So we spent most of our days just roving, and they were in the hills, mostly you, but I was on the beach all the time. And my dad would take us to the beach at 5 o'clock in the morning. He'd roust us out of bed. He'd say, wake ho, rise and shine, ready for work on the Matson line. And we would rub our eyes, and he would feed us and take us down there on a Saturday or Sunday, I guess Saturdays.
School days, if it was a low enough tide,
Oh, right.
we would actually, he'd get us out at 4:30 in the morning, and then we'd come back and get our school uniforms on and have to go to
Right.
the city. He was enamored with the ocean, and it was always low tides, and so there's a lot to see, and I resented it deeply at the time.
I loved it. I hated school. My fondest memories were Mrs. Fay and my dad walking on the beach. Let's see if we
Let's
have a
find
picture of
that
the Fay
picture.
house. That always starts me. Here,
Did you bring one?
it's right there.
Too many pictures. This is Faye.
Here is what the house looked like. And she was the most marvelous woman. She would go down to the beach with me. She'd say, oh, Emma, don't fuss over her. If it can't be seen by a man on a galloping horse, don't worry about her. And she'd take me down to the beach whip off her Lyle stockings and her high-heeled shoes and completely, dressed to go downtown, right? She would take me and wade through the water, and we would find mussel shells, and she would talk to me about the ocean, and I just thought, wow, I wanted to be a beachcomber when I grew up.
That's so different from how I remember the Fahey house. We went there often because we lived up County Road, not that far, and she would ask Bobby to come down, sometimes the cover on the well, and we would pick wild mushrooms and strawberries, and we'd get to go into her house in this big lobby, and we would always, I hated them, but I loved them because it was her house, this incredible house. Dates, stuffed dates.
Oh, right. She always had stuffed dates.
She'd let us go up the banisters and into the attic where all the old stuff was. It was an incredible experience.
In the attic, it was full of those hats with the pom-poms. Yeah. The men used to come and have cockfights up there. Her father he bought the land from a Spanish land grant owner, and so he knew a lot of people who were Californios, and they would enjoy his hospitality. Lyde was her nickname. Lydia Fahey was no slouch. The Ocean Shore Railway was coming through the area that my dad was describing in the video, and she watched the surveyors, and she was a young woman on a palomino with a rifle across her lap, and she went up and she said, "What are you doing on my father's land?" And they said, "This is the Ocean Shore Railway right-of-way." And she said, "No, it isn't. I have surveyed my father's land." And so she invited them to tea, and ultimately the man in charge said to Mr. Fay, "Your daughter has saved us all from a terrible misunderstanding and possible lawsuit." So knowing where you live is really, she was a wonderful role model.
Speaking of surveying sticks.
That's horrible and guilty. But
Time to confess.
When we were little, the ag land began to disappear. A gentleman even took his life because his farm was gone. And it was such a shock. I mean, it was wonderful. We had all these children and neighbors, but we were in town a lot because that's where our family was and where we went to school, in San Francisco, I mean. So it was like an encroachment on the green. Everything was turning into buildings. Vast armies of earwigs came into our houses because the ag land turned over so fast that they had nowhere to go. And so we resented houses, and we heard that was what was causing all this upheaval. So one day we were walking down Santa Maria, and there were two houses or stakes out for the cement pouring to happen, and we pulled them all up, which must have been a disaster for the surveyor and the contractor and the owners. But we were doing our bit for the ecology.
That's great.
But it's changed a lot, the whole. I'm pleased that so many people here appreciate that this isn't a lost land. In fact, we have, on the Open Space Committee, we discussed this one night, we have the perfect balance between human habitat and nature. If the whole world looked like Pacifica, we would be sustainable. But it has changed a lot. And one of the changes was they put the freeway right over Phil's Gulch, which tore my heart because Mrs. Fay and my dad, well, we couldn't go.
And the hog ranch.
Well, the hog ranch, the odor of the hog ranch I could do without.
You're very opinionated.
Did you have a story of a memory when you were a child in Shar Park of
there are lots of stories. Are you thinking of
the one with the bridge and the gentleman under the bridge? Were you wanting to tell that story?
Oh, that was a one.
Well, related to Phil's Gulch, which was right up where the Edgemar Freeway comes down over the sea in that area.
It was
where Fairmont is. No, what is the development toward the west there?
You mean past the
other end of Palmetto, where it winds up and goes towards the
dock.
Right. there were a series of dumps. They were impromptu places where people threw bed springs and God knows what, right? So there was a particular one down by Milagro Creek, and there was another one, I'm mixing. Phil's Gulch had an impromptu dump, but it was full of a beautiful creek with huge berry bushes, and that's why we went there to pick.
So up past McDonald's.
Right.
Right, beyond the
so
radio
people can-
station, right?
Right.
So there was a dump there. One of the Corley boys reminded me of that. I was running around up there with my dog. And, but the main dump was down by Milagro Creek by Pacific Manor. And
Where in Pacific Manor? Give it a...
let's see, Mrs. Fay's house would be at the mobile home park, and up where the land caves in, and they put a lot of riprap, and there's some access to the beach.
The junkyard.
Beyond
past
the junkyard.
Okay.
That's where there was a deep, deep ravine, and most of the things that were dumped there. And there was a man who lived there, and I need to correct something. Everyone has the idea that he was a black man, but he was blackened by the smoke from his hobo's fire, and he would pour over the dump. He would get things and make shelter, and God knows how he subsisted. People probably fed him. But once a year, the county would send people out, and they would run him to ground, wrap him in a straitjacket, and take him to the county hospital and bathe him and take his vitals around Christmas time, so that they knew that the community was doing what it needed to do. But one time, Maud Pitchke, who had the Breakers, which was our first newspaper,
Okay.
And
had a
that
picture.
newspaper was, that house is still there.
Oh, it is. It is. The little White House.
The little White House.
Well, they took his picture, and he looked just like Santa Claus.
Oh, that's... Well, okay. So the time has gone by so fast. I wish we had more time, but that's all the time we have for this week's show. And if you want to get involved with the Pacifica Historical Society and its many projects, you can go online to our website at www.pacificahistory.org, or you can call us at 650-359-5462. Thank you for watching the show, and thank you both for coming. It was great.
Thank you.
So nice to see you all
Great.
again.
Thank you all.
Yeah, good.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.